Welcome once again to our introductory lecture series on the divine principle. I'm Reverend Philip Shanker. In our first presentations, we studied God's ideal for the creation and the purpose and value of human life, the relationship between the spiritual and physical dimensions of human experience. We looked at the cause of the contradiction in human beings and how that has realized or caused a history of struggle and difficulty. We considered the dynamic relationship between destiny, God's eternal and unchanging will and purpose for human beings, and freedom, the role of human responsibility in the accomplishment of God's will for our life. Then, based upon these principles, in our later presentations, we began to look at history. Initially, history as recorded in the Bible. We looked at the families of Adam and Noah and Abraham. We looked at the course of Moses and Joshua, and ultimately the mission of Jesus as he came to a people who had been prepared for 2,000 years to receive him, but tragically never recognized him as the very Messiah that they were waiting for. In the process of this study, we could come to understand that while God's will for human beings is absolute, it's absolutely predestined, its fulfillment is conditional, contingent upon human beings fulfilling our given portion of responsibility from the beginning. Now, in our last presentation, we did something dramatic. We looked at the 2,000-year history of Israel preparing for the coming of the Messiah and compared it to the most recent 2,000-year period of Christianity outside the Bible from recorded history. And amazingly, we saw clear and striking parallels between each of the ages in these two different dispensations, because both were preparing to receive the Messiah. Israel to prepare for Christ's coming, and Christianity to prepare for his return. Now, as we promised, we will, in this presentation, go into a deeper analysis of each of these parallel periods in the 2,000 years of Israel and the 2,000 years of Christianity. Let's begin. We're going to discuss the parallels between the two ages, the 2,000-year period of Israelite history preparing for the coming of Jesus, and the 2,000 years of Christianity preparing for Christ's return. Let's begin. Since the ultimate purpose of the providence of restoration is to lay the foundation for the Messiah, then if that providence is prolonged, the dispensations to restore the foundation must be repeated. It's for this reason that history repeats itself, and for this reason that the 2,000-year period of Christianity paralleled the 2,000 years of Israelite history. This is meant, in effect, the repetition of dispensations to restore through indemnity the symbolic offering, the foundation of faith, the vertical condition, restoring through a condition centered on obedience to God's word, restoring man's faith in God, and the substantial offering, this the foundation of substance, the horizontal condition where through the unity of brothers or the unity of two divided peoples, a condition to substantially remove the fallen nature and lay the foundation for the Messiah is realized. This has been the content of these two histories. Now, the nation centrally responsible for God's providence in the age of restoration was Israel. This, the 2,000 years preparing for the coming of Jesus. Now, the message of the prophets was never to reject the Messiah, but always to receive him. Prepare a highway in the wilderness for the Lord, said Isaiah. Clear a path. Isaiah said every mountain should be brought down, every valley should be filled up. Make his paths straight. This was not to prepare for a crash landing. Likewise, Moses said, the Lord God will raise up from you a prophet, as he raised me up, and you should follow him. You should obey him. You should heed him in all that he does. Israel was prepared to receive the Messiah. What a tragedy that the very nation that longed for the Messiah was never able to recognize him. That Jesus, as he hung on the cross, the people shouted and mocked, "If you're the Christ, bring yourself down. Prove to us that you're the one. Then we'll believe you. Now, Jesus in Luke 19:41, when he looked over the city of Jerusalem, he wept. He reflected on the suffering that was going to come to the people of faith, his beloved Israel. All, he said, because they did not know the time of their visitation. In Matthew, the 21st chapter, the 33rd verse to the 43rd verse, Jesus describes the parable of the vineyard, in which he describes the history of Israel and the tenants of the vineyard rejecting the servants and later the son. And afterward, Jesus says, the kingdom of God will be taken from you and given to a nation bearing its fruits. In this spirit, St. Paul, in Romans, the 9th chapter, said, not everyone who descended from Israel belongs to Israel. And it's not the lineal descendants of Abraham who are truly descendants, but the children of the promise, those who've inherited this mission and this responsibility. Now, the Old Testament, which records the history of Israel, provides the source material with which to study the history of the providence in this Old Testament age. But the mission was inherited by Christianity. With the failure of the nation to receive the Messiah, a remnant of faithful Israelites became the foundation for the New Testament era and Christianity. Now, the people then who became centrally responsible in the age of the prolongation of the providence of restoration were, in fact, the Christians. Christianity can then be considered a new Israel, a second Israel, and therefore its history follows the providence. How can we see this? The history of Christianity provides the source material for understanding the providential history in this age. Let's begin by looking at the first parallel period, the period of slavery in Egypt, as compared with 2,000 years later, the period of persecution in the Roman Empire. The period of slavery in Egypt was for the restoration of the 400 years from Noah to Abraham, a period for the separation of Satan. This period had been defiled due to Abraham's mistake in his offering, and so had to be restored through this later period. Now, the corresponding period, 2,000 years later, of persecution in the Roman Empire was to restore this previous period through parallel indemnity conditions. By enduring this 400 years of suffering, Christians were restoring the 400-year period of preparation for the advent of the Messiah, the period prior to Jesus, from Malachi that had prepared for him. This had been defiled due to the people's mistake in leading Jesus to the cross. Let's consider the parallels between these two periods. During the period of Egyptian slavery in Israel, after Jacob entered with his 12 sons and 70 kinsmen, their descendants suffered terrible abuse at the hands of the mightiest nation on the face of the earth, Egypt, for 400 years. So Israel began from the 12 sons and 70 tribal members of Jacob. During this period of persecution, they maintained their tradition of faith by circumcision and by keeping their tradition of offerings, and when they could, honoring the Sabbath, even in secret. Therefore, they prospered. They maintained their spiritual tradition, and they prospered. Even under slavery, they multiplied rapidly, which caused concern and fear among the Egyptian rulers. The next 2,000-year period began, this period of Christianity began from the 12 apostles and the 70 disciples that Jesus sent out in Luke, the 10th chapter. During this period of Roman persecution, Jesus' 12 apostles and 70 disciples were the first of many who suffered severe persecution at the hands of the mightiest empire on the face of the earth, Rome, over a period of 400 years. However, during this period, Christians, even in secret, maintained their traditions, the sacraments of baptism and communion, and also they honored the Sabbath, even in the catacombs under the city of Rome, in secret. Thus they prospered spiritually. Christianity spread even under persecution, even though Christians were being publicly scorned, put to death, thrown to the lions, forced to be gladiators, etc. But still, Christianity prospered during this period. Now, at the end of Israelite slavery in Egypt, Moses was able to bring the Pharaoh to his knees by the power of 3 signs, miracles, and 10 plagues. Moses was able to convince the Pharaoh, after a history of persecution and slavery, the Pharaoh was convinced to let the people go. On this foundation, Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt and set out for the land of Canaan, where they could establish their foundation in the land of Canaan. Now, toward the end of the period of persecution in the Roman Empire, the spirit of Christianity, by the power of Jesus, had increased the number of believers, moving their hearts with power and grace. Therefore, Jesus was able to inspire Emperor Constantine to recognize Christianity, and Theodosius the first to establish Christianity as the religion of Rome. So likewise, in the 4th century, the Roman emperors, after a history of persecution and oppression, the emperors began to recognize the value of Christianity. Constantine saw the value of the Christian faith and tradition for the Roman Empire and declared an end to the persecution. Then in 392, Theodosius made it the official state religion of the Roman Empire. Thus, Christianity was able to restore Canaan spiritually inside the Roman Empire, which represented the satanic world. Another important parallel, at the end of this 400-year period, Moses received the 10 commandments and God's word as revealed in the law. This formed the core of the Old Testament scriptures. In other words, the people were given now a standard of God's word, a standard of the truth by which they could unite and, by obeying God's word, fulfill their national level foundation of faith. At the same time, by setting up and honoring the tablets of stone and the Ark of the Covenant and the tabernacle, they paved the way for the Israelites to prepare for the coming of the Messiah by establishing a united tradition of Israelite faith centered in the law and with the central point of worship, the tabernacle, which later became the temple. Likewise, in the Christian era, Christians gathered the writing left behind by the apostles in the 4th century and the evangelists and established the canon of the New Testament. There were more than 30 gospels written. There were 5 books of Revelation. There was Gnosticism. There was the controversy over the divinity or humanity of Jesus between Arius and Athanasius. There were differing denominations and perspectives and theologies. It was in the 4th century, under the leadership of Constantine, that councils were organized, the scriptures were decided, the official position of the church and of Christian faith was established, and the official scripture was canonized. This provided for the Christians the same thing as the Jews 2,000 years ago, a standard of Christian faith, a standard of the truth by which Christianity could establish its foundation of faith in obedience to God's word. This became the gospel, the good news. Likewise, it was in the 4th century that they built up churches, these great basilicas, great edifices to honor God and for God to dwell with the people. This expanded their foundation to prepare for the second coming of Christ. It was in the 4th century that St. Augustine lived, and he wrote The City of God, the ideal of bringing God's ideal down to the earth through a city that lived centered upon God as compared to a secular and corrupt city. This was the parallel of this first period. Let's now consider the period of judges and the period of regional church leadership, the second providential period in these two histories. After the Israelites entered the land of Canaan, 15 judges governed the Israelite tribes for 400 years. The tribes move into the land of Canaan. They divided the land amongst the 12 tribes. Each of the tribes was under a tribal leader, and the strongest of these leaders was named judge. There were 15 judges, the most famous of whom was probably Samson. Likewise, in the New Testament age, the period of regional church leadership was set up to restore this period of judges through parallel indemnity conditions. As Rome declined, Christianity moved into the barbarian lands of the Germanic tribes. The church lands and church territory was divided into 5 holy sees centered on Rome, Constantinople, Jerusalem, Antioch, and Alexandria. Each of the sees was ruled by a patriarch, and the strongest of the patriarchs was named Pope. In this way, a similar indemnity period. Now, in this period, the regional church leaders, the patriarchs, the bishops, and the abbots led Christian society, holding similar duties to those of the judges. In this earlier period, the judges had had the prophetic, the sacramental, and the political roles all in one. The judges filled the various responsibilities of prophet, priest, and king, which became separate offices in later periods. Likewise, Israel was under a feudal system. Israel in this period was a feudalistic society with no centralized political authority. The land was ruled by each of the 12 tribes, and their economic life and their social life was organized in a feudalistic manner. Now, 2,000 years later, in the period of Christianity, like the judges of the Old Testament age, the regional church leaders had similar duties to those of prophet, priest, and king. Likewise, Christian society during this period was a feudalistic society under these local authorities, politically, economically, and socially organized under feudalism. Let's now look at the next period. This earlier period of 400 years, now there had been an established tradition of faith, and Christian society, like Israelite society before, was organized for the people to build the foundation of faith during that 400 years. Next comes the United Kingdom and the period of Christian empire, which paralleled it. In the period of the United Kingdom in Israelite history, the functions of the judge, which had been 3 different areas of prophetic and sacramental and political, were now apportioned to the offices of prophet, priest, and king. The prophets received instructions directly from God. The priests kept charge over the tabernacle and later the temple, and the king governed the nation. Thus, these offices were now divided. Each carried on their distinct mission in guiding Israel to accomplish the goal of the providence of restoration. The unity between these individuals was a key condition for the foundation of substance. Now, the purpose of the period of the Christian empire was to restore this period of United Kingdom through parallel indemnity conditions. Thus, the missions of the regional church leaders were apportioned to the offices of monastic leaders or monks, which corresponded to the prophets, the pope corresponding to the high priest, and the emperor who ruled the people, like the kings of this earlier period. Now, these were responsible now to guide the second Israel on this 400-year foundation of having built up a Christian tradition of faith, now to accomplish the goal of the providence of restoration, a foundation of substance. So their unity was an essential and key condition. It was 800 years after Abraham's descendants entered into Egypt that by God's command, the prophet Samuel anointed Saul as the first king of the first Israel. The people had clamored for a king. Seeing the kingdoms around them, they wanted to be organized in the same way, but they were never allowed until the year when God inspired the judge, Samuel, and told him exactly who he would find, what kind of situation. He would be riding on a horse, he would look like this and this, and that man is the king that I have prepared. And so Samuel anointed Saul as the first king, and this period of a united kingdom began. Likewise, Pope Leo crowned Charlemagne and blessed him as the emperor of Western Christendom on Christmas Day in the year 800 AD. Now, Charlemagne was perhaps the most enlightened and righteous leader that European civilization had known to that time. He sought to build the city of God that Augustine had written of. He compared himself to David and saw himself as the mission to create a Christian kingdom. The crowning of Charlemagne was an effort to revive the Holy Roman Empire, a united empire with Christian faith at its center. Another important aspect, however, of the foundation of substance, besides the unity of pope and king, like the unity of chief priest and king in the earlier period, was the building of the temple. Had this been done, then the foundation for the Messiah would have been laid in Israel at that time and 2,000 years later in Christian history. Considering Israelite history, if, with the crowning of King Saul, if the temple had been built, with Saul worshiping in the temple, the king and the chief priest united, and all of the people of Israel worshiping one faith, one tradition, the Abrahamic covenant, the Mosaic law as their foundation, this would have been a foundation of faith and substance, and the Messiah could have come to Israel at that time. However, because King Saul disobeyed the commands of God, he was in no position to build the temple. Saul actually turned away from God, became ultimately possessed, and sought to kill his successor. 40 years